Okay, I'm going to do the Mark and Service like Bible Institute and Discipleship Training Thingamajobber. Our goals for this week are read Mark chapters 9 and 10. Meet with someone who will help grow your gifts. This is week number 2 of 3. Also visit an orphan or widow and help them, pray for them, and give something up each day for someone else. The name of the book of Mark is, it's named after Mark, the author, sometimes known as the Gospel of Mark or the Good News of Jesus as recorded by Mark. There's Alberta working behind here, doing her office work. Selfie! Of the author of Mark, we actually know a bunch about him. Interestingly enough, we know more about Mark than we do about Matthew or Luke, although we know some things about them as well. Less than John. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John being the 4 Gospels or recordings of Jesus' life, the historical accounts. Mark is mentioned by Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 11, where it says, "Only Luke is with me, get Mark and bring him with you, for he's useful to me for ministry." I couldn't find anywhere that guarantees that these are all the same Mark, but it does seem, as I read different commentaries, that it's a consensus that each of these Marks that are referenced in the New Testament is the same guy. Name being John Mark with a Hebrew name and a Gentile name. John being a Hebrew name, Mark being Gentile name. Paul says that go get Mark and bring him with you, for he's useful to me in ministry. So we know that not only is Mark affiliated with Paul, but Paul thinks highly of him. Peter also, in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 13, calls him something interesting. While he's giving greetings from different people, he says in 1 Peter 5, verse 13, "She who is in Babylon, elected together with you, greets you, and so does Mark, my son." Now, I didn't see anywhere that said that Mark was actually a physical son. Although I guess I don't really know. Is that possible? But we do know that that type of a term is used sometimes. Is a spiritual term. Paul referencing Timothy as his son and others in a more spiritual sense in the family of God. And it is widely thought that Mark is writing from the first-hand account of Peter. So it is assumed that there's a close relationship there. And since Peter is referencing him as my son, whether in a spiritual sense or even, a physical sense possibly, there's a close relationship. And also, he's mentioned as Barnabas' cousin in Colossians 4:10. It says, "Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, greets you, with Mark, the cousin of Barnabas, about whom you received instructions. If he comes to you, welcome him." So that's another instance of Mark being mentioned. It seems as if it's the same person. He also went with Paul and Barnabas on the missionary journey in Acts chapter 12, verse 25. It says, "And Barnabas and Saul returned from Jerusalem when they had fulfilled their ministry, and they also took with them John, whose surname was Mark." And again, it seems as if this John Mark fellow is Mark. That's what's often referred to. Do I know for sure? No. Do I see in Scripture it links these all absolutely together? No. But it's likely that at least one of these is the Mark that we're talking about who wrote the book of Mark. And interesting enough, if it is John Mark with a Hebrew and a Gentile name, I guess it's possible then that references him having a mixed heritage or ethnicity, like Paul himself, being both Jewish and Gentile in some kind of some part of his ancestry. The time that Mark is written, Mark doesn't reference the fulfillment of the prophecy that the temple will be destroyed, which happened in 70 AD, and that suggests that the book was written prior to this. There's also a Roman feel to the book. What are you laughing about? There's also a bit of a Roman feel to the book for a couple of reasons. If you read in Mark chapter 11, verses 1 to 4, or Matthew 21, verses 1 to 6, there's a parallel passage about Jesus sending his disciples to go get a donkey, a colt of a donkey, a foal of a donkey to ride on, entering Jerusalem. But in Matthew, it references this obscure prophecy that the Messiah will come riding on a donkey, the foal of a donkey. But in Mark, it leaves that out. And so it leaves out prophecy which would be important to a Jewish reader, a Hebrew reader, but not so important to a Gentile. And so it's again, it's just a hint of a bit of a Roman feel. The other part being that when there's Aramaic phrases, like in Mark chapter 3, verse 17, he feels the need to interpret them. Aramaic being a language spoken of in Judea, in the area of the Jews. And here again is Mark 3, verse 17. James, the son of Zebedee, and John, the brother of James, to whom he gave the name Boanerges, that is, the sons of thunder. And so he's feeling the need to interpret, to translate this Aramaic saying. And so it's just interesting. We don't know for sure, but it does seem as if there's a bit of a Roman feel, as opposed to Matthew, which clearly makes genealogical connections, makes sure to include many of the prophecies. And Mark doesn't avoid the prophecies. He just doesn't emphasize all of them, particularly ones that are maybe a little obscure and only important to those who would be familiar with the Jewish texts. The time written about is just before Jesus' ministry begins. In fact, this is really a 3-year book, Mark. It just touches on, in the first part of the first chapter, John the Baptist, the voice of one crying in the desert, prepare you the way of the Lord. And it ends with Jesus' death and resurrection. So it goes from about 30 AD to 33 AD. There's obviously other connections to the books in the Bible, being the other Gospels, Matthew, Luke, and John. There's lots of overlap, even specific events, parables, and each of the Gospel acts as a different witness, confirming the historical account of Jesus coming, dying, and being raised again. The purpose, one of the main purposes or themes, is that Jesus came as God's servant on a mission. Mark chapter 10, verses 35 to 45, pulls out a couple things, both something about the disciples, but it also, the last verse particularly, demonstrates that Jesus is preaching a gospel of sacrificial service in obedience to God. Anyways, let's read Mark chapter 10, verses 35 to 45. Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him saying, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask. And he said to them, What do you want me to do for you? They said to him, Grant us that we may sit, one at your right hand and the other on your left, in your glory. But Jesus said to them, You don't know what you ask. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink and be baptized with the baptism that I am baptized with? He said to them, We are able. So Jesus said to them, You will indeed drink the cup that I drink, and with the baptism I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit on my right hand and my left is not mine to give, but it is for those for whom it is prepared. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be greatly displeased with James and John. But Jesus called them to himself and said to them, You know that those who are considered rulers over the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be among you, but whoever desires to become great among you shall be your servant. And whoever of you desires to be first shall be slave of all. For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. The main point I want to pull out of there is just that that Jesus had many things to do, but one major part is that he came to serve. He came, it says right there in 10:45, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served,